All right, so a couple more Pythagorean trig identities. I already did the video proving sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. We're going to do a couple more here. You want to be familiar with the reciprocal trig identities. The cosecant of theta is 1 over the sine of theta, and the secant of theta is 1 over the cosine of theta. So this is just the reciprocal of the sine. This one's just the reciprocal of the cosine. If you recall, the tan of theta equals sine over cosine, and the cotan of theta is the reciprocal of the tan of theta. So if you just take the reciprocal of this, you'll have cosine over sine. All right, so you can make two more identities from this here. If you divide both sides by sine squared theta, okay, so I'm going to divide this by the sine squared theta, and this right here by the sine squared theta. All right, so we're adding in the numerator divided by a common denominator. So this is over sine squared and this is over sine squared. Sine squared divided by sine squared is just 1. And this here is going to be cosine squared of theta divided by sine squared theta. And that is going to equal 1 over the sine squared of theta. And of course I ran out of room. Anyhow, we said that 1 over the sine of theta is the cosecant of theta. Okay, so we know that 1 squared is still just 1. And in the denominator, we have sine of theta. So that's basically 1 over the sine of theta squared. Okay, remember when you square a fraction, the numerator and denominator are individually squared. So 1 squared is just 1, and sine of theta squared is just sine squared theta. And all right, let me rewrite this vertically. I'll have to erase this mess here, but you need to know these for this proof. All right, so this is 1 over sine of theta squared. This is still 1, and this is going to be cosine of theta divided by sine of theta, and that whole fraction is squared. Okay, because you're squaring the numerator and denominator individually, so those are equivalent. And we said a minute ago, sine over cosine is tan, cosine over sine is actually the cotan, and that's squared, and that equals, we said 1 over sine is the cosecant of theta, and that's squared. So I'm out of room, but if you want to set it equal to 1, actually I'm just going to leave it like this right here. Okay, you can certainly set it equal to 1 if you like, but I think this is the most common version. So 1 plus cotangent squared equals the cosecant squared. So that's another Pythagorean trig identity. All right, we're going to do one more, but now we're going to divide by the cosine squared of theta. All right, so instead of dividing both sides by the sine squared, now we're going to divide both sides by the cosine squared of theta. All right, so these are both over a common denominator. So right here, we have sine over cosine. And right here we have cosine squared over cosine squared. That's just 1. And this is 1 over cosine squared. And we can make this 1 over cosine theta quantity squared. Okay. 1 squared is just 1, and cosine squared is cosine squared. So same thing. All right. And this right here, instead of sine squared over cosine squared, we can just put the squared on the entire fraction like so. All right, I'm not sure if that's what I did last time, but sine squared over cosine squared, same thing. When you square the fraction, you square each one individually. Now we said sine over cosine was the tangent function. And that's squared. And this is just plus 1. And we said 1 over cosine is the secant function. And that's squared. So this right here is another Pythagorean trig identity.